Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Law Review with your host, Tone Vase. Sorry, we have not brought you the show in a while. So many things have happened in the world of crypto law, especially the main issues that we're going to cover today is Texas trying to eliminate anonymous Bitcoin transactions. And of course, what happened in the last 24 hours, where all of a sudden people are saying that the chairman of the SEC is saying that Ethereum is not a security. We're going to try to clear all that up. Let's bring on our panelists. We will have a few more joining us in a little bit, and one of them is just coming on now. But let's say hi to our current panelists. Stefan, we'll start with you. You finally came back to our show, so thank you for coming on. Just the shortest of intros, and then we'll move on.
Steve Pally, I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C., primarily focus on crypto fish litigation.
Excellent.
Fascinating.
You said short, so you didn't say I had to be truthful either.
Perfect. Bill, let's head over to you.
Hi, Bill Restis from the Restis Law Firm in San Diego. Just to keep it short, I'm part of the lead counsel team in the Tezos securities class action and another class action against Coinbase. I dabble in STOs and help blockchain entrepreneurs get their projects off the ground. Nice to be here with everybody.
Cool, thank you. Sasha.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Tone. Attorney with DLT Law Group, focusing on any kind of consulting around Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, a lot of money transmission stuff.
All right, cool. And we had Adela here for a second, but I think she had audio issues, so she'll be back. We're gonna jump right into the stories because we have way too many, and I am here in Hong Kong. Conference starts in 50 minutes. I know I'm gonna be late, but I want to be as late as little as possible. Adela's back. Let's see if her mic's on. We'll do a quick intro and then we take it from there. Adela, let's get your audio in. Click the little arrow next to the mute button and just double check what your select a microphone check mark is. And then we'll test it. Just say something. Okay, can you get Adela?
She'll be back.
All right, she'll be back. Okay, let's jump in and I'll keep an eye on that. Screen share. All right, sorry guys, I have to do this. We are putting together a conference in Malta, and since this is a different type of show, maybe like a few more people will know it exists. Understanding Bitcoin, there will not be a law panel on this one, unfortunately. Neither will there be a financial panel. It's all about learning why Bitcoin is decentralized, and we'll try to actually, that is going to be part of our show a little bit today, and how to run a node and how to properly use Bitcoin. Please check out understandingbtc.com. All right, that's the only advertisement for the day, and we are jumping right in to our first topic, which is governments versus the crypto space. So we have a statement on potential regulation from FATF. So this is the financial, is it authority on, I always forget. It's also early in the morning. I always have to look it up. Financial Action Task Force. So these are the guys that are going after money laundering and KYC AML stuff, and they're recommending certain things, and they're kind of focusing on virtual asset service providers. Now, this is not law. This is just their recommendation towards law, from my understanding. So let's just do a brief intro on what they're actually thinking. I don't know, Pally, you wanna kick us off here?
I'm going to defer on this one. I think this might be more of an Adela.
Okay, yeah, and Adela was supposed to be here and she's returning her computer. We can wait for Adela to come back, and we have like a million other stuff. So let's do that then. Let's jump over to Texas. This is the one that's really, really interesting. This is Jason Seibert won't be joining us. This is his hometown, and Drew Hinkes seems to also be MIA. But Texas wants to ban anonymous crypto transactions. So Drew Hinkes, who's usually on the show, says, congratulations, Texas, you're the first state to formally attack an attempt to ban anonymous use of cryptocurrency in the US. I guess we'll stick with you, Pally. This is like it's almost unenforceable, right? It's like banning the growth of a marijuana plant that failed after 40 years. Like there are certain things you can't do, and because they're like just not possible. So what are they doing? I understand why they're doing it, but like, and of all the states, right? Like this is the crazy part. You have like the socialists of states like California, and then you have like supposed to be the anti-socialist state, which is Texas, and they're the ones banning this. It's just like weird. Go for it.
So Bitcoin, specifically, and cryptocurrency generally, are very new technologies. Bitcoin is 10 years old, right? And what the problem that we have, and it's not just in Texas, it's everywhere, where the legislature has tried to either promote, or in this case, according to Drew, sort of regulate with a heavy hand this new and emerging technology. You have people who don't actually understand the technology, don't necessarily understand the impediments to enforcement. I think that's the problem here. I actually know, we don't have a link to it, but I was yesterday or the day before looking at a Vermont statute, which allows you to create a blockchain-based limited liability corporation. And if you go through the language of the statute, it literally doesn't make any sense. I think that may be the issue here. As to whether it's enforceable, just scroll back down to the link that has the statutory language in it. There you go. I mean, the issue is, I think what you're saying is it's not possible. It wouldn't be possible for people to require identification. It's certainly possible at an exchange level. I guess the question is whether it would be possible at a peer-to-peer basis. How would you enforce that obligation? This hasn't actually been signed into law yet, has it?
I don't think so.
No, it's just a bill.
So it's a bill, and if you remember I don't know if folks here or listening are old enough, if you remember the old PBS explanation of how something becomes a law. Just because something is proposed as a bill doesn't mean that it's a law. It still has to go through. I don't know if this has come out of committee yet. It still has to get to the governor. So there's certainly time for changes to be made. I think if we got freaked out about every dumbass bill, pardon my language, world and YouTube, if we got freaked out about every dumbass bill that's proposed out there, I think people would be terrified. There's some legislative proposals out there that are absolutely ridiculous. So on the one hand, you hear people in the crypto community saying they want guidance and regulation, and they want legislators and regulators to step in. And then when you have it, sometimes people don't like what they get. So I suppose it's a flip side.
Feel free to jump in, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a chance to pull up the text of the bill, and this is what it actually says. The meat and potatoes of this bill says that, and I'm quoting, before accepting payment by a digital currency, a person must verify the identity of the person sending payment. A person is not required to verify the identity of a person sending payment if the payment is sent by a verified identity digital currency. So let's unpack that a little bit. So how would you verify the identity of a person who's paying you for something in cryptocurrency, right? I mean, the easiest might be, as said, you use an exchange that requires KYC AML. So they would have your driver's license or your passport and various other information that could be used as a proxy to substantiate this information. Another way could be that you get on a text message and you send a person a picture of your photo ID or passport or something that's kind of similar to to the KYC process that's used by crypto exchanges now. The other thing that the bill says is that you don't need to go through any of that if you use some type of a what they call a verified identity digital currency, which would be something that has identity baked into it. Now, I don't know exactly what would qualify for that in its current state. It contemplates a technology that, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't exist. I think I agree with Stephen that this is a pretty ridiculous bill. It probably, who knows the likelihood that it will be passed. It seems an anathema to cryptocurrency in general. And at the end of the day, it's completely unenforceable unless you're talking about, I was trying to game out in my head, what does enforceability look like for this? Well, it might be tax payments, for example. If, let's say, the state of Texas or the IRS, people are reporting their crypto transactions to the IRS or to the state tax authorities, and then suddenly they see that certain transactions have been made. Possibly they could reverse engineer that to see whether any type of identity verification was made. But in the end, I think this is a total cluster bleep, and hopefully it goes nowhere.
All right, real quick, Sasha, you have anything to add? And before you do, I want to throw this in here. So this is part of one of my presentations, and it kind of, this is what happens when the bill, when this stuff is unenforceable. And so here's a bill in Louisiana, RS 37 1866. Maybe you guys can look that up and see how Louisiana is enforcing it. And it says a secondary dealer shall not enter into any cash transaction in payments for the purchase of junk or used or second-hand property. Payment should be made in the form of check, electronic transfers, or money orders issued by the seller of the junk. So basically, they made garage sales for cash illegal in Louisiana. This was a while ago. So I'm really curious how they're enforcing this.
Yeah, to me, this kind of reminded me of, I don't know how many people read the Coin Center piece that they put out on privacy last week. It was a really, really good piece talking about some of the dangers of an intermediated society or a surveillance state. And they were talking about that, in China, as recently as 2012, it was 96% cash-based, and now it's only 15% cash-based. And they have that Alibaba scoring system where if you're breaking traffic laws, you're not following birth control regulation, you're plagiarizing at schoolwork, you get these low grades. And one of the punishments is that you get slow internet speed. And it's, they went very much into detail of the dangers of this kind of surveillance state and where it can take us to. And I think using only, KYC'd cryptocurrency for every transaction or any transaction, like this is where it could lead to. So I think it's a pretty dangerous approach by Texas, but agree it would be very difficult to enforce.
So from a challenging it standpoint, I almost wonder, I'm looking at this and thinking how you'd go about challenging it. If you had a federal standard, you could make a Commerce Clause argument that a statute like this potentially it was something that infringed upon federal sovereignty. So one way to deal with weird state laws, which might otherwise be technically enforceable but problematic, would be to have a uniform federal standard, which I think is controversial, but it's certainly a way to avoid outliers like this. I'm not sure how, if there were a contrary federal statute passed probably under Congress's Commerce Clause authority, I'm not sure that would be unenforceable.
Adela, you want to? Yeah.
Those are good questions. I mean, but Sasha, you raise a really, something that's not necessarily a legal issue, but it's one that we all have to deal with, is that this technology that was born by Bitcoin really has the potential to create a very oppressive surveillance authoritarian state system. And, it's going to be laws like this Texas bill that would usher that into place. we certainly don't want the United States or any other country in the world to adopt these types of social credit systems that China is adopting. And I think we need to fight back against it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Adela?
Just a quick thing.
Sure.
Stellar put out a new logo, and it's the same logo that was on the One World Currency back in, it was like on the Economist cover page, like in 1993 or something. It's just kind of funny. Like this could be where it's, all
What,
headed.
did you say Stellar?
Yeah.
No, it's amazing how these, decentralized cryptocurrencies can just rebrand, right? It's really fascinating.
Yeah, so hey guys.
Hey.
Hey, Adele.
Yeah, finally I have this thing up and working. Where's David Silver?
He's running a little late. He'll be here.
Nobody else to make fun of him here except me.
I can make fun of him too.
Ultimately, I think these things are extremely dangerous and, not for the reasons that a lot of people might think they are, but I actually think that, these things are sort of a byproduct of tax cartels, trying to deputize individuals into helping them enforce their obligations or whatever they think their obligations are. Just think about it for a second. What if we have to get KYC or do KYC on everyone that we conduct a transaction with? We're storing a person's personal information. I mean, we've seen such great hacks. I mean, what good could that possibly lead to when you think about it? That we are somehow on our phones and our computers storing personal information of anyone we're conducting a transaction with. It's ridiculous. That's what I think about it.
Yeah, no, and it is in general too, because like I'm always going around all these conferences and people want to connect with me, and my form of connection is Telegram, and the reason for that is I don't need to save other people's phone numbers, and I don't need to give them my phone number. I think WhatsApp is ridiculous and everybody loves it, but when someone puts me into a WhatsApp group with 1,000 people, 1,000 people now have my cell phone number, which already has been hacked once. So it doesn't even go as far as payments go. Just personal information is just like, there's no reason for you to have another person's personal information of any kind in this day and age in order to do business or communicate.
I totally agree. And so I'm very curious to know what the intent was. What is the intent? And so, I mean, I stated what I did, but, I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist when it comes to like these organizations anyways. But ultimately, I just think it's a terrible idea to deputize normal individuals into really being financial institutions. What's the point, really?
All right, so so this is the bill, right? The details of the bill.
Yeah, that's the
Yes,
actual bill.
All right, well, we'll see where this goes. Let's jump over from a state that is.
I hope it doesn't pass. By the way, I don't know if anybody else on the panel disagrees with me, but I really hope it doesn't pass.
So yeah, I suppose we have to move on, but I can make the argument for the other side.
Oh, okay, Stephen, let's hear it.
Well, so if I hire someone to do work at my house and they provide a certain amount of work, let's say I've got a babysitter or somebody who does yard work, I actually, at a certain point, if they provide enough labor, if I pay them by cash or by check, I actually have to report that transaction to the, yes, I do. I have to report that transaction. I have to file it. Is it a 1099? I have to file tax forms. I may have to actually pay Social Security. The state does currently have an interest in tracking certain kinds of financial transactions, whether they're in cash or paid in cash or paid by check, and they're able to check your truthfulness by accessing things like bank accounts. So I can see a state I'm not necessarily saying I agree with the way this statute has been written or this bill has been written, but I can see a state thinking about both making sure that they're able to continue um, receiving taxes from people. I can also see, like, I give a lot of presentations to people who don't know anything about Bitcoin, don't know anything about cryptocurrency. Public perception still by a lot of people is this is used for drugs, human trafficking, and lots of bad things. It's certainly possible that whatever committee drafted this bill, that's the input that they received, right?
No, but Pally,
We're going to talk about Quadriga next too. So
yeah, we're gonna
it's
get to
not
that,
like,
but it
Are
sounds
you,
like
are you trying to move away from this? Because your
no,
argument
no,
was
I'm totally not. No, I'm saying that the industry and the community itself has a lot of mud on its face. There are a lot of bad actors in the space. There are a lot of bad things that have been done with crypto, and I think it's
yeah. Have you ever
understanding.
heard of the saying that good intentions are?
Sure,
Oh
sure.
my God, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
I don't disagree with you.
Well,
Right.
and I
No.
think we have to look at it from a macro perspective. So yeah, so some government agency can make sure that their taxes are properly collected. You can,
Right.
you can prevent money laundering or terrorist financing by requiring, things of this nature. But I tend to be a very libertarian person. I'm a lawyer that frankly hates a lot of the law for
Sure.
reasons that I think it's overreach. And I think that the dangers of this type of legislation far outweigh the, the benefits from it. And if we're going to go down this road, we should get rid of cash. We should make sure everybody has cameras in all of their rooms, and which we already do with our laptops and our cell phones. But we really need to fight back as citizens against this ever increasing nanny and surveillance state. There will become a point where we create a turnkey totalitarian society, at which point we've crossed the threshold, crossed the Rubicon, and it's a point of no return.
So I don't necessarily disagree with the points that you guys are making. However, I think in order to look, if you want to respond to what Texas is doing, you have to understand the reasons and their motivations. I don't think they're all bad. I think they might be mistaken. I don't know that it's all a push for totalitarianism. I think part of it might be good intentions, but insufficient knowledge. That's my only.
I'm with you. A lot of it is taxes. I don't want to move us along, but I will throw my 2 cents in there on your argument, Pally, in that what you described is not what they're doing. They're going the other way. What you described, the law for that already exists. Whether you pay in chickens and cryptocurrency and fiat currency, it doesn't matter. The law that they're trying to create is that babysitter is not allowed to accept a payment without KYCing you, even if it's just a one-time babysit. And that's one of the issues that this could create, in my opinion.
Well, I still can't accept a briefcase full of cash from someone who I don't know, particularly if it turns out that they're a drug dealer. It's not like these requirements don't exist to a certain extent in the world of cash and checks. I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I do think there's another side.
All right, so let's go from a state that is being, anti-crypto to a couple of states that are going in the completely opposite direction. One of them is Missouri, and again, unfortunately, Drink is not with us, but they're trying to pass a bill that would require state political subdivisions to accept virtual currency as legal tender. Now, I glanced through this, and there is Colorado is doing something. Let's cover them both. Now, Colorado is actually doing something similar as well, and to me, this is equally as insane, right? Like the legal tender one, if you look at it, the state and every political subdivision therefore shall accept virtual currency as legal tender if not capable of accepting virtual currency due to the state of the political subdivision software hardware. They have to update it, but they don't specify what the hell virtual currency is, right? Because like my argument to this stupidity is, and we'll get to OneCoin later in the show, I would mandate that state to accept the biggest scam there is, OneCoin, so that they learn their lesson of defining their damn terms before passing a bill. I'm not sure which is more insane. And here we have Colorado that is saying that everything is okay, including tokens, and they don't separate the tokens. So in the Colorado case, like if you read through this, the issue of a digital token, this one is, man, here. The issuer of the digital token markets the digital token to be used for a consumptive purpose and does not market the token to be used for a speculative or investment purposes. And then they talk about, how soon you can sell them. And the problem with the legislature, in my opinion, let me throw my 2 cents in and I'll go to you, is that, like, yes, in theory, this is what you want. But the reality of the situation is none of these tokens actually have a use case. Like maybe in 0.1% of the cases, they may have some kind of a fringe use case. This is not how people use them. This is not why people buy them. I know there may have been a minor exception in the Ethereum ICO, mostly because no one thought that thing would actually work. And a lot of people, including our Adela here, who's mentioned it on the show, kind of, invested in the early Ethereum ICO because then she did not expect, honestly did not expect it to ever see anything out of it, right? Now there are those, but that's not what's been happening the last 3 years. And my favorite part of that story is like the first person that made a comment, and this is a pretty good comment, and like the person is trying to explain the difference between ICO tokens and actual currencies like Bitcoin, and then talks about blockchains. But I would say that even this person that has a very nice sounding comment that says at the end, blockchains and tokens and or coins aren't the same thing. Blockchain is a technical implementation of a distributed and immutable ledger. And I would argue this even with the commenter that had a very wise comment saying, no, blockchain is not a technical, Bitcoin is, because no other blockchain besides Bitcoin is actually immutable. Like Ethereum has proved this, multiple times already, along with almost every other blockchain. They're not immutable, and they're not decentralized. At least you use the word distributed, probably meant to use the word decentralized. So like 99% of the people don't understand the definitions, and this is how we end up with this. Thoughts on both of the situations, the one in Missouri and the one in Colorado. I don't know, whoever jumps in first. I guess, Sasha, you're smiling a lot. Why don't you go first?
Okay, well, the Colorado one is very similar to the Wyoming one. Actually, it's identical to the Wyoming consumer token. And what's interesting about that is that by taking it out of the state securities laws, it actually puts it into the property laws, which have supremacy over the federal laws because they're part of the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. So even if the SEC tries, and this has never been tested, this is the theory behind why they're doing it. I don't know if this would hold up against the SEC in court, but the theory is the SEC has jurisdiction over state securities laws. This is not a state security issue. It's a state property issue now, as long as it meets a consumer good, which, as you elaborated, probably not a lot exist right now, but maybe the rare Pepes are consumable because, there's art on them. You look at them, you enjoy them. There's a lot of other art tokens that I think have some consumer value, or, it's an argument that people can make, certainly. But I think that's what's cool about these is that it's supposed to take it right out of the SEC's hands.
Well, the argument, I'm sorry. I think I've heard this before. The argument is that because this is a thing that is defined by and given meaning by state property law, therefore the SEC doesn't have jurisdiction, even if it's a security. There's no way that works.
Well, they're saying it's not a security because it's a consumer good. And in that United States Housing Foundation versus Foreman case, they say that anything that has a consumer good is not governed by the SEC. So these, Colorado and Wyoming, and I think a few others have adopted this to say that these are UCC things, they're property. And they've used the same logic to say that electricity and software, two things that are kind of similar to a blockchain, transaction in that they're not tangible, but they've moved them into this tangible good category by 20 years of case law on the electricity side to say that these things are consumer goods, which I guess electricity is.
Looking like he's losing his shit right now. What is going on? I need to know.
The problem with that argument is that electricity actually has use. So to say that something is not a security because it has use, I think maybe it just states the obvious. It seems like we're doing some fancy dancing here to take this thing that was called a utility token, which didn't actually have utility but had expected future utility. I don't think at the end of the day it necessarily works. I will say though, it's sort of a truism that writing laws is like making sausage, right? It's like you don't necessarily want to understand how it happens, or if you see how it happens, sometimes you'll be disgusted by what's in the sausage. I think what we're seeing here, what's interesting for people in the crypto community is you're seeing how laws are being made, and you're seeing how in the United States, the states are the laboratories of democracy, right? So the fact that a state doesn't get it right necessarily right away, I don't think that's a problem. And if we don't know what consumptive good means, if that becomes a law, then a court will say what it means. Or Colorado, like that Texas statute said, we're going to have agencies give us meaning. Agencies are going to promulgate regulations that say what this particular type of identity token is. So, well, I think the idea is, I think it's a creative argument, Sasha. I didn't mean to be dismissive. It's interesting, but, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't mean that it won't get sorted at some point.
Hey guys,
And
I
think we need to get Polly a T-shirt that says "The Devil's Advocate."
Yeah. Little old me.
Yeah.
Let's
guys,
unpack this and go backwards a little bit, because I
Oh,
think
Bill, hold on. Bill, before you answer, we have David Silver as well, but I do want to throw this in. Can we just clarify something here? Like, again, I'm a believer that the SEC has the final say. I could be wrong here on what is and isn't a security, right? So just because Colorado or Missouri,
you're actually wrong, Tone. It would be a federal judge in the United States. Since Marbury versus Madison in the early 19th century, it's up to the judicial branch to say what the laws mean.
Oh no, I'm with you, but
okay,
I meant.
Wait. One sec. We should change that T-shirt from Devil's Advocate to Well Actually.
Right.
All right, guilty. I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to mute my mic. Go ahead.
Guys.
He's right. He's right.
So, like,
Thank you.
by SEC, I meant like federal jurisdiction in general, which the SEC is involved in. So basically,
no. You're using the term wrong, right? So you've got the SEC as part of the executive branch, right? The SEC has authority under different statutes to promulgate regulations and to enforce in certain ways. It's actually up to the courts. The courts have jurisdiction over what the statutes mean, and actually they can say whether or not the SEC is right or wrong.
But right, but they're federal courts. They're not state courts.
The state courts have jurisdiction over state securities.
Right. So, for example, I mean, like, here's where I'm headed, right? Just because Colorado said that, token X is not a security, but the federal court said, like, the SEC filed that they are a security. Like, who does it matter what Colorado thinks it is? If, let's say, I mean, the SEC has already, declared certain ICOs to be securities and they fined them for it. Does it matter that the state says, well, we're in Colorado, so we don't care?
Well, if it's okay, so if the issuer is in Colorado and it's sold only to Colorado residents and you're not dealing with anybody outside of Colorado, then we could exclude the SEC really wouldn't have and this is a broad, I always say this, nuances omitted, but then the SEC wouldn't really have jurisdiction over that particular transfer.
That's
right?
interesting.
Or to sell this nationally and you get outside of the state of Colorado, then you're right. Then you would get in and the SEC would have jurisdiction.
But because there's no KYC in this space, that's impossible to do, like technologically, right? To sell only in Colorado.
Yeah,
Well,
as soon as you use
it's
the
not-
wires or mail of interstate commerce. But if it's a property under UCC law, that does, from what I understand, that does take it out of the SEC's jurisdiction, possibly. Like we'd have to see it in a test, but states have higher property right to their state laws than the SEC does over their state securities laws if this thing has been deemed property and not a security by the state. It would be like the SEC coming in and saying all cars in this state are now under our jurisdiction when it's been taken out of the security law of the state. And that's way overbroad of a thing to say cars because they're clearly a good, but they're putting it into the same category as goods.
So that's an interesting question. So that gets to the question of whether or not software is a good or a service. And I'm not sure that's a settled issue either.
Yeah, I think when I was looking at it, there are 20 states that have called it a good, and same with electricity. It's the same case law that they're using for both. They go through this list of things like, can you see it? Is it movable at the time of sale? Can you track it? There's all kinds of different variables that each state has used to come to the conclusion, and it's like a split issue. But a lot of states have come around to call these things goods.
It depends on how the software is being developed and designed and the purpose to which it's being put. I don't think there's any sort of black line. Software is a property, software is a service. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we also need to go back and talk about what this law is really like. What is it allowing? Okay. So if you look at the text of the bill, and this is Colorado, because I imagine a lot of the people who watch this show are maybe developers, may have projects. So really what this is saying is that you can do essentially an ICO. You can sell it to Colorado. You can be from Colorado. You can sell it to Colorado residents. If you do an ICO for a token that has consumptive purposes. Now, I don't know what that means. I think Adela, you talked about, or Sasha, you talked about Pepe tokens. So what does really a consumptive purpose mean? You can't say that you're going to make money on these tokens, right? So you can't pump it. And so really what we're dealing with here is it allows a certain type of a sale of tokens that are used for a specific type of purpose, which, as you said, Tone, nobody seems to do or use. There's thousands of crypto tokens out there. I don't really know many of them that would fit within this consumptive purpose.
No, they're using them. No, Bill, all of these tokens are quasi being used. My point is that I can argue that they shouldn't exist. Like they don't like they're being used to overcomplicate your system in order to profit from the value increase of the token. Like they don't really need to be functionally there. We can argue that the Ethereum token is functionally there because Ethereum wouldn't function without its token. But I can also argue that smart contracts don't need a native token because eventually there'll be smart contracts on Bitcoin. So what's the point of the Ethereum token? Eventually,
it's like a crypto kitty, right? So like, let's say you wanted to do a sale of crypto kitties. I think that would probably fall into a consumptive purpose. If it's something that has a monetary function, or it has a function that is similar to some kind of a traditional investment, something that is intended to appreciate in value, this law wouldn't even apply. So I think that when we're talking about these statutes, we're really talking about, almost a unicorn, a fictitious animal that doesn't really exist in nature, right? So I don't know what this statute would really do.
All right, let's get David in here real quick. So we've been talking about the 3 states that are in the news this week. Texas by trying to eliminate anonymous transactions. And we talked about this insanity over in Missouri that will mandate every single business in Missouri to accept every virtual currency known to man, potentially including OneCoin, which we'll talk about later. Even if there is no technical capability of accepting the virtual currency because it doesn't actually exist and it's fictional because they're not defining what a virtual currency is. So this is amazing. And of course, the Colorado thing saying that all ICOs are fully legitimate without simply looking at the statistics. And I think this is grossly inaccurate that 81% of ICOs are scams. It's clearly 99.9. David, quick thoughts on what the hell the states are doing.
Well, let's take a step back for a second. First of all, I don't even think I need to come anymore. Tone has just adopted all my views. I mean, to the 6 years I've now known him, that is just an insane switch. This is great. I'm glad he saw the light. I mean, first of all, I've been very complimentary to what's happening in Wyoming. I don't necessarily agree with what Wyoming's doing, but I think we're seeing the problem with what Wyoming's doing is starting to permeate to all the other states, and why this is a federal problem, not a state issue. And we're going to see the states adopt a lot of laws, and then the federal government and the federal regulators are going to come in, declare a whole new set of rules, and there's just going to be fighting all over the place. And I'd rather be on the federal side than the state side in fights like this, because, I mean, what Texas did is crazy. What Missouri did is crazier than what Texas did. And what Wyoming's doing is simply trying to front run Delaware to create a new place for pro-business where no actual business exists to actually replicate the success of what's going on in Delaware. So from my point of view, we're a little early to the game. And what a lot of these states are writing are very lobbyist intensive one way or the other. And ultimately what we're going to see is the federal government come in and just wipe all of this work out, because they're going to end up declaring something from a regulatory perspective in the next year or two that is going to wreak havoc on the system as we know it.
David, are you saying that you don't want to pay your taxes in CryptoKitties? Because I would love to pay my taxes in CryptoKitties.
Well, someone told me, I don't know if this is a true fact, that only like 3 people paid their taxes in Ohio with Bitcoin. Apparently, I'm the only one that heard that.
I'm not surprised.
Like, there were 3 people, and needless to say, it didn't really work. Look, I think that a lot of the regulatory work that we're seeing, and I think Drew, who's not on the show today, or was here before I was here, look, he's doing a good service by putting out all the language that's out there. It's good. People should be debating the language, verbiage. The verbiage and the regulations is going to matter. The words that people use matters. I think that's been a common theme for the last 24 hours. So I think it's good that people are debating this. What I do believe strongly is that we're seeing a lot of propaganda litigation that I don't think is going to stand the test of time right now.
Yeah, and David, and I bet you if there were 3 people in Ohio that paid their taxes with Bitcoin, the only reason they did that is to get into the news. Like there's absolutely no functional reason to do that.
Well,
none whatsoever, except for the fact that they probably only paid like 10% in taxes. It wasn't wealthy people, but look,
well, it's not like Ohio. It's not like Ohio actually accepted private key. It's not like Ohio actually accepted Bitcoin. And
no, they use the middleman like Coinbase.
They use BitPay. So the question with Missouri is, what does it mean that you can pay taxes using basically any digital asset? Are they going to set up wallets? It makes no sense.
No, and like the language,
set up wallets.
The language in the Missouri bill is crazy. It's like they're mandating this. Like I mean, if they did it right, and I'm not even a lawyer here, why didn't they say that like you're allowed to use it and it's up to the merchant? Like they're basically forcing the merchant to accept like scam coins. This is insane. Like I have no idea what Missouri's doing. Anyway, let's move on. I don't really, it's Canada. I don't know how much time I want to spend on Canada, but so Canada is all about the taxes. So Bitcoin investors.
Luckily, we have a Canada expert right here.
Oh yeah, we do. Hey, Sasha. So what is your country doing? And this is hilarious, right? So they sent out this questionnaire, basically asking people to incriminate themselves with, which was also hilarious. And speaking of Canada, we'll get to Quadriga in a minute. So Canada is really going after the taxes. I mean, a lot of countries are going after the taxes, and we'll see how that goes. They mentioned the IRS and the Coinbase case, but yeah. So what's going on over in Canada with the whole tax issue? And did anyone fill out this questionnaire? You have to be crazy to fill this out. Like some of their questions are like, have you used Bitcoin in anonymous transactions? Like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's have you used Shapeshift? Did you use a mixer? Give us a copy of your energy bills. Are you mining? How much did you They wanted to know if you installed a Bitcoin ATM, how much you paid for the installment cost. Like it's just way too much, list all the addresses you control. But that's Canada for you. It's a country with free healthcare and a lot of other expenditures, and they collect a lot of taxes. I remember half of your money goes to tax. So if there's people not paying tax on their Bitcoin or they're worried about that, I was surprised they didn't come out sooner than this with an aggressive stance on tax. To my knowledge, they really weren't focused on taxing Bitcoin at all. You weren't required to KYC yourself at a lot of places, and they just kind of let it keep going, and then now come out with this ridiculous thing. And they're classifying it under the barter exchange rules, which means like here in America, there's at least capital gains tax. Like it's treated the same as the stock market. In Canada, they're treating it as this barter exchange where it would only be classified as income.
Right. So the good thing about Canada was, I don't know if it still is, but the last time I was there, is that their ATMs were actually non-KYC'd. And the way they classified Bitcoin over there was that, hey, it's just like cash and you don't really need to KYC. And now I guess they're realizing, oh man, and like what usually happens, like what happened with Bali, where everyone is like, we're all moving to Bali. It's the greatest crypto regulatory environment ever, and then everyone moves to Bali, and Bali is like, nope, illegal. And that's what I expect to happen from Malta too. And everyone seems to disagree with me and think I'm crazy, but I just keep an eye on Malta.
No, and I don't think you're crazy. I think you're right about Malta.
So
throw in Puerto Rico too.
Yeah, Puerto Rico is going to be another one. So let's jump over. Let's stick with Canada for 200. The QuadrigaCX, and all of this news. They're finding out that all of the money, all of the Bitcoin was drained from the cold storage early on. Here's a good update from Bitcoin Magazine where they basically highlighted all of them. Now, my question is, right, where is the liability eventually going to fall? And I already heard through my some of my back channels and some of the rumors, what happens to when they've already discovered it, a lot of the Bitcoin actually moved through places like BitMax. So what happens? How does the liability fall on other exchanges and the places where it got cashed out? I mean, David, you're fully aware of this from the Cryptsy case, being able to cash it out through Coinbase, right? So what happens here? I don't know who's up to date on the Quadriga situation.
So I've taken some hits, especially on Twitter. And if you're watching the show, go follow me on Twitter so you can make fun of me. But I can't find any victims in this case. I mean, it is crazy the amount of money that claims to be missing and the utter lack of creditors who have stepped up. And I want to say credible creditors of people who held accounts at Quadriga who actually lost money. And if so far the filings, there's just a dearth of actual people who seem to have lost money here. And I just don't get the numbers that are being thrown around, because there's going to be a very sad group of people. And I think it's going to be the professionals who got involved when there's just no money to be recovered. Let's just assume.
Do you think the numbers are misrepresented?
I think the numbers are heavily misrepresented. I think that there's a wash of the crypto that was going through to artificially inflate the numbers. And I think what you're going to find is ultimately this was about $5 to $10 million. I mean, I think the largest individual who's come out publicly and filed something in the papers, and I'm relying on mostly a lot of Amy Castor, who's done some great reporting on this, David Gerard, who's done some great, I think Kyle Gibson's done some really good work here. I'm relying on what they're saying, but I think the largest individual so far lost, and he lost about $400,000, $500,000. Look, I know there are a lot of reasons people stay quiet, but normally, especially given how my understanding of how the Canadian process works, if you don't come out publicly and say you lost money in the very near future, you're going to lose the rights to claim that money through the process. And I'm just waiting for people to come out and actually announce they have real tangible losses. And until that happens, but let's assume, because I think Tone's question is, if there are real tangible losses, would I want to be BitMEX or Shapeshift or any of the other entities who process this money? Look, I'm 3 years into the Coinbase case, and I have a lot of good things to say about Coinbase and Brian Armstrong. But what happened at Coinbase in 2015 should cause people to be scared about how easy it is for bad guys to liquidate money. Thankfully, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals stood by the plaintiffs in the case, and ultimately that case will be resolved. Third parties, if they launder the money and actually convert it to fiat, and they didn't properly KYC in the United States, that's a problem. Now, what does that mean for BitMEX, who's not in the United States, but run by United States citizens? That's a whole nother quagmire. But there are going to be professionals, especially as crypto legitimizes, there are going to be professionals, accountants, lawyers, and service providers who are going to be accountable for converting over stolen money.
Hey, Tone, I see that Drew is,
Oh,
we've got
yes.
Drew.
We got Drew. Anybody
Tone,
else
can
want
I show this is my high school QEH right in Halifax, where all these proceedings are taking place with the Quadriga stuff. So I've gotten a lot of calls from people, and same thing as what David said. No, I haven't come across a single person except one on Twitter, I think, that said that they actually were had money invested in this, but it's quite a shock in a small community in Halifax that this had been going on. And that woman, his wife, Jennifer Robertson, she had several, I think 6 properties registered in several different last names across all of them. I don't know. And then in the Bitcoin Magazine article, it said that when he died in India in December, that was their honeymoon trip. So they were I didn't realize they were in very new relationship, and the will being just recently updated to put everything to her. And then, as David actually put a really, Brian Armstrong put a string of tweets out of what he thought happened. And then David commented, yeah.
Sasha, did you just say die?
Yeah, die.
Right. Because you know what? If I die, I can't be arrested, right?
Yeah.
It just sounds very strange to me that this man dies in India and is cremated.
Adela, you cut off Sasha from saying something really nice about me counter-tweeting Brian. Will you let the brilliant Sasha talk about my brilliant tweets? I mean, normally that's Steven's forum of everyone giving him credit for being smart. I did one good thing here. I'd like to be given credit for it.
So listen, David, I'd like good job, all right?
Hey, guys, let's get Drew in here. And by the way,
Drew!
if anyone,
Hey, Drew.
What's up, y'all?
If anyone has to get going, just give me a heads up, and then we'll get your final comments, because we have like a million stories. So just give me a heads up if you have to leave. Drew, let's get you in here. We're talking about Quadriga, and then I'll back up and get your comments on what the hell the states are doing real quick. But Quadriga, go.
Sure. Thanks, guys. Well, thanks for having me. I sent over the link that I see you put up about Miller Thomson. They were the firm that was appointed by the court that was handling the Quadriga case to act on behalf of the creditors. As you can see from Miller Thomson's website, it says that there are approximately 115,000 users that they expect to have been affected. They were the primary counsel. I think this firm called Cox and Palmer, also out of Canada, is sort of the local counsel in the specific place in which the exchange was incorporated. I think part of the reason that Mr. Silver was having a hard time finding the big claimants who are going to say that they were harmed is that they all went and found Canadian counsel. From speaking with some Canadian lawyers who don't want to be named, I can tell you that there was a really significant effort right when this broke to track down all of the big creditors. So we might not be able to find them because they're all looking for Canadian lawyers. And unfortunately for a guy like Silver and a guy like me, they're not looking for lawyers in Florida.
Hey guys, what am I? Someone has a TV on really loud. I don't know what's that.
Working on it.
Oh, that's you, Drew. Oh my, you are. I got you. I got you. I got you. That's okay.
Sorry about that.
Well,
No,
just to comment on what Drew's
while he's on the podcast.
Yeah, just to comment on what Drew's saying now. While I agree with Drew, they were looking for Canadian lawyers. I got pulled in through the Canadian lawyers to work on this. And Sasha, maybe you can jump in and say what the Canadian law is on this. But don't the creditors have to apply pretty early on in this process?
Oh, I actually, I don't know the Canadian law.
I think we're going to be surprised as to how few people file claims, because there were a lot of people who were looking to do interesting things. But look, I agree. The Canadians, God bless them. I hope they find this, trace it, do it, and I hope Jesse Powell at Kraken pays us $100,000 and shows everyone he's a good guy.
All right. Well, hey, I want to get Drew real quick. I do want to move on to the SEC and the CFTC stories. But Drew, we already covered, the crazy thing that Texas is trying to do by banning, anonymous Bitcoin transactions, which they can't enforce. The craziest of them all, I believe, is Missouri, because this is just insane, because they don't even define virtual currency, but they're going to force everyone to be able to accept it somehow across all virtual currencies. And Colorado is following what Wyoming is doing. And again, like, the issuer of the digital token markets the digital token to be used for a consumptive purpose and does not market it. It's all about marketing, but in reality, there's no reason for any of these tokens to actually exist, because they don't actually have a use case. So which is the craziest state, and which one like fascinated you the most of these stories?
All right, so I think the craziest is probably New Mexico. And there's a statute that was brought up before their legislature. It's a bill right now that would require any company doing anything involving crypto assets to be incorporated in the state of New Mexico, to have a New Mexico barred attorney on their board of directors, to have an agent for process in the state of New Mexico that is a New Mexico lawyer. And if they're doing anything where they're marketing toward or selling anything to New Mexico residents, there's a special 2-line warning label that has to be attached to all of those transactions. This is well beyond the protectivism we saw with the BIT license. This is further than New York went. This is very plainly and clearly the stay out of New Mexico law for crypto. And this is by a mile the most conservative, most everybody don't do business in my jurisdiction law that I've seen. So that one's a surprise. The Missouri law that you mentioned is interesting. It has a really weird virtual currency definition. It says that it's any digital monies in an unregulated environment. Okay, everything is in a regulated environment. I don't know who wrote this, what lobbyist or what company or what legislator wrote it. It seems as though they probably did not consult with people who regularly deal with these assets. It's an odd one. No, so Silver loves to bag on Coin Center because he still hasn't understood what lobbyists are, and that they will act on behalf of a position. It doesn't mean their analysis is right or wrong. It means that they advocate.
He's salty because Niraj blocked him on Twitter. I think that's it.
It's entirely possible.
Just because Wyoming is doing this for the people, but Missouri or New Mexico is doing it wrong because they're not following what the lobbyist money who also gave money to Coin Center are saying. I do agree with Drew. I mean, the New Mexico one is great for New Mexicans. If that's even the proper way of saying that.
So the New Mexico one is super protective of the interests of people who live in New Mexico. I would guarantee if that thing passes and is enforced, you're going to see the instance of victims of fraud plummet, because nobody in their right mind is going to do anything in New Mexico if that thing passes, unless you literally want to just do a super protective sort of system that only caters to New Mexicans. On the other hand, you've got Missouri, who has filed. The state has a bunch of bills pending in front of it, including this particularly wild one that we just mentioned that would say that crypto and all these assets, as awkwardly defined as they are, would be legal tender in the state. That would have really bizarre implications for banking and all sorts of other places that this bill just doesn't contemplate.
Drew, but here's how I read the Missouri attempt to do this, is that I show up at a store and I force them to accept my OneCoin for payment.
So what this says, if you look at the clip, it says every state and every political subdivision shall accept virtual currency as legal tender. So it doesn't necessarily say private enterprise, it says the government has to accept it.
Also, the government has to take my OneCoin.
That means has to be accepted for payment of taxes. That's what legal tender means.
Hypothetically, yeah.
Yeah, it means two things. Legal tender means, so when it's legal tender for all debts, public and private, means you can pay your taxes with it. It also means that if I owe you $50 and I offer you $50, you have to accept $50. You can't say, no, I want you to pay in chickens. So,
right. So you can do private contracts with it, and the government will say that's a good way of making good on your promise under that contract. Yeah. That's a super oddball statute.
All right, so let's jump on. We have other stories. So this is the I guess this is our bread and butter. We have the CFTC and we have the SEC. Oh man, which one do we go first? Let's go with the SEC. Let's go with David Silver's favorite company. Am I losing you guys? What's going on?
Got a little ping, but I think we're okay.
Okay. So let's go with this article from Jerry Brito, something about the SEC chairman, Clayton, just confirmed commission staff analysis that found Ethereum and crypto like it are not securities. And this immediately went all over. Pump said breaking, SEC chairman. It's like a broken telephone, right? SEC chairman confirms Ethereum is not a security. Pally, you had an immediate issue with this. Obviously, I mentioned it as well that he didn't say that. And these were the comments that I immediately, got towards saying, hey, can we just stick to the facts a little bit here? And of course, no one is interested. So I just, reiterated that no, chairman didn't actually say Ethereum is not a security. This is still more of an opinion from a person. Oh man, we're gonna get to Vitalik later. Who wants to go first? Pally, how about we go with you, and then we'll let Silver think about some better words to talk about his friend Jerry Brito of Coin Center. So Pally, go for it. What's going on?
It's not what Jay Clayton said. What he said in a very carefully written 3-page letter was that he generally agreed with Hinman's analysis that a digital asset can change over time. And it's pretty much what Clayton said. I heard him speak at Consensus Invest in, I think it was November in New York. It was the same thing. The thing that it's like, I think I said this earlier too. This is like, it's like pigeon entrail divination. When people are like trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future by reading a letter that an SEC commissioner wrote. It's not how his letter, he's saying, yeah, I think what that other guy said about securities generally kind of makes sense. He didn't say Ethereum is not a security. And you know what? If he had, this is really interesting. Let's assume, arguendo, for the sake of argument, that Clayton said, yep, Ethereum's not a security. Show of hands for the lawyers on how many people think that that would have any sort of binding precedential effect on a court if that were raised in the context of litigation.
None of us.
Nobody.
None of us.
It doesn't matter. So people who are in charge of agencies, or heck, the president can say, I think a statute means X.
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't.
Polly, it's
Go ahead.
It's at least persuasive.
No, it's not persuasive. This particular statement, also the thing that Clayton said, if I'm a federal judge, let's say I'm a crotchety federal judge, like fast forward a couple of years to crotchety Steve Bally on the bench wearing a black robe and he's had a bad day and he's hungry, he hasn't had enough herring lately. I don't give a crap what some guy said in a letter. I really don't. I might even yell at a lawyer for telling me to consider it. It's totally irrelevant. It's not persuasive authority. It's not precedent. It's not obiter dicta. It's a letter from
Whatever.
an SEC commissioner.
Whatever.
But I think
So-
there's some
Whatever.
cogent things
It's
in
not
this
as if the
letter.
books are brimming over with, precedent or even, information about this. There really isn't much. So if this guy has an opinion on it, I would look at it, frankly.
But he doesn't. Clayton doesn't. He says that what Hinman's observation is that things can change over time. Something can start as a security and later not be a security. And
It would have
Clayton,
been,
I think he was
Clayton says
talking-
yes, and I agree. I think that makes sense conceptually.
this is so the opposite of helpful. Okay, people are waiting for somebody from the SEC to say, here's the line, right? They want somebody to say, here's what we want you to do, here's what we don't want you to do. What the chairman said here is, yeah, I agree with what Hinman said. I'm with you. I understand. What he said is, yeah, I agree with what Hinman said. And yeah, I believe that this is the way that we analyze this stuff internally. What he didn't say is, and here are the factors that you as outside advisors, lawyers, should be telling your clients when making an offering that they need to pay attention to. Here are the things that after we thought about what Hinman said for a while, we think are really important. And here are the things that when you're analyzing your strategy for compliance, you should think are the most important. Instead, he just said, yeah, we think at some point these things might be able to change in their quality and character where they might not be securities anymore. What this does is it continues the confusion. It continues the lack of clarity. And yeah, if you ask the SEC, they're going to say, what do you mean? We've been clear. It's the Howey test. This is how you tell if something's a security or not. And if they say, well, when does it stop being a security? They can say, well, we had 2 staff members that made some comments about it, but that's all we've got. And as a lawyer who's asked to advise clients, that's not helpful.
Because the analysis is actually kind of cogent, right? So we're going to go back to Howey, and I think that that's important. We've talked about this damn case to death on this particular podcast. But really, I think what was being confirmed is that there's the difference between the investment contract and the token, or there can be, right? They can be one. The investment contract and the token can be one in the same at the moment of, let's say, the ICO, right? Because if I'm giving money to a founder who will later take that money and develop a token. And I'm relying on the expertise of the founder to create something that's valuable, then that satisfies an investment contract. But once you get outside of that reliance on someone to develop something that will create value for me as an investor, the token itself doesn't necessarily have the characteristics of an investment contract. And I think that's an important distinction that needs to be made. It may be, I'm sure it will be made, as Stephen, you said, by the courts. But we all get in our heads, maybe not us on this panel, but I think, the market in general tends to think of, what is a token a security? And the token itself is really less relevant than the offering from which it was given birth, right? And I think that that's exactly the analysis that's being made here.
So there's 2 questions that no one has ever answered. The first question is, we're used to investment contracts that have aspects that make it a security and some other thing, right? Beavers and the beaver maintenance contract, orange grows and the orange maintenance contract, whiskey barrels and the agreement that they're going to monetize them. In all the cases that I've looked at, and I can't say that I've looked at all of them, the service portion, which is what creates the collective aspect, ends, right? Howie was a 10-year contract. The beavers were the life of the beaver. These are open-ended. These technically, because they're sort of retroactively backed into being investment contracts, don't have an end date. There's no day in which by contract, you no longer rely upon the issuer to do some stuff. So you're left with like a couple uncomfortable options. Uncomfortable option number 1 is We come up with a 19-prong analysis to figure out when it's no longer a logical time to rely. That's where we've been. Number two, we come up with just an arbitrary date. Or number three, we try to figure out when they've actually complied with the promises that they've made, like when they've satisfied by performance, which, because each of these are different, seems totally impossible to do. That's number one. Number two, none of us can address whether all these factors that were discussed by Hinman make sense, because all of these projects are different. All these projects say they want to do different things. They have different elements. They have different milestones. They have different goals. It's not like there's 8 different orchards that are out there harvesting fruit. These are really different things. And so when a regulator has a super hyper flexible test like the Howey test, they intend to grab all kinds of weird configurations of incentives in order to protect consumers, but also allow people to be able to raise money within limits. Everybody benefits when they know the guardrails. We've entered structures that just don't plainly fit on a whole bunch of different reasons. And I've yet to hear of anybody who acknowledges those 2 points, or at minimum gives me sort of a cogent pushback. And for the lawyers out there who might be listening, and it might just be the 6 of us in this room, but if there's anybody else out there, I would love to see some analysis as to whether investment contracts typically are bounded by time, where they would have a natural expiration or not. Because to me, that seems to be such a obvious thing that we haven't thought about that would lend some visibility as to why this is so unmanageable given the way that it's been interpreted and applied.
Well, Drew, isn't that really, isn't there a proxy for that the marketplace uses in this whole notion of centralization or decentralization? So you have really very good questions. And I think that lawyers, obviously, all of your points are very cogent, but at the same time, there is, how do we communicate something like this to non-lawyers who are trying to navigate this marketplace? And what you're saying is you can't. You're saying that you can't.
100%. Yeah, hey guys, I just want to jump in here real quick, and then I do want to go to David Silver. And so Chairman Clayton said he agreed with the views of Hinman, but in Hinman's speech, and this is what everyone continues to glass over, and Pally, you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show. Literally, I highlighted it for everyone. It says, I'm quoting Hinman, based on my understanding of the present state
of Ether. Yeah.
Based on my understanding of the present state of Ether, the Ethereum network and its decentralized structure currently offers current offers sales of Ether are not security transactions. Well, there are no current offers and sales of Ether. So
he's referring to the secondary market here, Tone.
Yeah.
Okay, the secondary market, sure. Okay. But he also has a misunderstanding of the decentralized structure of Ethereum, which doesn't actually exist. So so many problems here. And what you said, Drew, when is the end date? I can state the day your blockchain can hard fork, or the day the leader of your blockchain simply announces a giant protocol change. Nope, that's Pally. So it's one of these things. I propose we consider basically the rule of Ethereum will dictate the future of Ethereum. None of this is decentralized. And one of the reasons why it's a mess is because companies like Consensus are the ones over there lobbying for this garbage.
So I guess what I would say about
talking about this for 2 weeks.
The problem is, and the reason why I think Hinman's analysis is interesting, he only got one side, to your point, Tone. When he says, my understanding of the current state of decentralization, he got a perspective on Ethereum from lobbyists. He doesn't know that it's impossible to run a full node. He doesn't know that most transactions run through Infura. He doesn't actually, if someone were litigating this, someone spent 2 or 3 years doing discovery and presented decentralization to a federal judge, it's possible, I don't know, I don't have the 3 years of discovery, but it's possible a judge could say, I don't buy it.
Let me jump in here. This was in June or July of last year? Is this before Ethereum 2.0 and before they scrapped 3 different scaling plans? Is it possible that even by an objective standard, Ether is in a different state than it was at that time?
Ooh,
And
you mean
how
it
has
decentralized?
Well, wouldn't that make it so much worse? Doesn't that like just completely undermine the entire opinion then?
right? But here's
Because-
my point. Here's my point. These are dynamic systems
Yeah.
with governance as obvious as scrambled eggs. And it's very, very difficult unless there's an objective, measurable standard that everybody agrees to come up with anything that even approximates
I'm not sure.
measurement.
I'm not sure it's that confusing, Drew. I just think that the narrative that's been created has been created by people who have a particular financial interest. I think that between the 6 of us, I think there's 6 of us here, yeah? Between 7 of us, excuse me. Adela, you fell off of my screen.
But 6 lawyers, I only pretend.
Six lawyers, we could easily, if we had the time, explain why this thing is centralized and not decentralized, if that was our intention. I don't think it would be that hard.
People have done this to the CFTC quite recently. Like the comments were due on February 14th. And we saw, big differences, what Craig Wright wrote in comments about how centralized it is. So did Coinbase, actually. Now that they have their, ATS, it's in their advantage that it would be considered a security. But, there's certainly...
that is really, I would love to talk about that.
But well, I was just saying, my thoughts on why this was put out today is probably the CFTC might be getting ready to announce that they are in agreement that it should be considered a commodity.
I was afraid you were comparing me to Craig Wright.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should be shocked if the CFTC announces it's a commodity.
Yeah.
Well, hang on. They have jurisdiction because they take jurisdiction over anything for which a future may be offered. So basically,
Drew, I think you disagree with me. Oh my God!
I know we got to stop doing this.
I mean, my point is that first of all, my whole problem with the Hinman speech, and we don't need to rehash all my problems with it, is the exception swallowed the rule. That whole speech was predicated by not looking at the actual sale, and I said from day one, the SEC, the CFTC, the IRS, FINRA. Every DOJ, every government regulator that's going to look at these things, they have to take a practical view moving forward. And there's no possibility in my mind that the regulators are going to come in today and basically say every single ETH transaction from the beginning of time is void and we're going to go unwind every transaction. They have to let the marketplace develop and grow. At this point, they're going to punish the bad guys somehow. And I have said this from day one. I think Vitalik's working with the governments around the world. Once you have money, you want to protect money. It's the reason why the Brightmans, suddenly are KYCing their customers. Why Voorhees at Shapeshift is AML KYC is now, what he's doing. They've got $1 billion each to protect. The government's job is not to come in and blow this up to zero. Their job is to come in, get the bad guys who did some bad things, and help the system develop and move forward. So I do believe we're going to see a lot of pro-government, pro-SEC, pro-CFTC statements on large accepted tokens, which are no longer doing sales, like ETH. And it's just a practical reality.
Yeah, David, when you're not...
Plus for the statist?
No, don't make me clap for this. But hey, I do want to circle back to something that Sasha said, because after I sent out the tweet, someone asked, well, what's the big deal? Can you explain it to the layman's? And like you mentioned, well, maybe I should have put Coinbase here. And to me, the simplest, most layman's explanation of what happens if Ethereum is deemed a security, well, then it can't be traded on these crypto exchanges legally, because then the exchange would instantly be in violation. And it looks like the only exchange that would have a monopoly on trading the Ether token would be Coinbase.
Well, I mean, ultimately, and I think everyone on this panel, and I think everyone watching the show, will hope that all of these eventually start getting traded by legitimate institutions. Both Coinbase, Kraken, Poloniex, Gemini, whether any of those are legitimate is up for public debate. But if Fidelity moves into the space, if T0 actually legitimizes a security token platform, which I have my doubts about. But if we start,
I have bigger doubts than you, Dave.
yeah, I mean, but if we can actually start where you can walk into Morgan Stanley, Lehman, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and trade these things, I think that's good for all of us and good for the space. I've said this for a long time. Show me the applicable, use for all of these things, and then let's start trading them. I think that's what we all want. We just want it done in the right order and for the right purposes.
One other comment: if Ethereum was looked at as a security, and if everything that happened with respect to any Ethereum transaction is also a securities violation, then every ERC20 contract, including every issued token, is likely also a violation as either fruits of an illegal transaction, or if they're considered derivatives, independent violations.
Well, and so that's really the issues, that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. This really is all about the secondary market and sanitizing what in other contexts may not be sanitary.
And I guess the question is, in the context of a court case, will a judge care? Judge might. Judges do care about broader policy sometimes, but it's different if a judge is looking at it as opposed to a regulator. That's a bit of a wild card.
All right, so before we move on, David, last chance to comment on the actual article by Jerry Brito and why he just opened up this can of worms with his phrasing.
Well, I think that I'm biased, and I think what Steven's really mostly today, comes off as a little less biased than me. Yeah. I think that everyone here in the space has an overt bias. And what Coin Center's mission and who they're supported by and funded by is to say that they are working with the SEC, and the SEC is utilizing their policies. So I think everyone amplified today something that wasn't necessarily accurate, but sounded good to their bases. And all Jerry Brito wrote today, and by the way, Jerry blocks me too, just so it's not just Naranj, Jerry blocks me also. All he did was amplify to his base that what they're doing is being heard on in the halls of Congress, and that you should give them more money.
I don't actually think that's fair. I think Jerry's wrong. I think the headline was incorrect, but I think it was it's lobbying strategy.
Well, actually, sorry, go ahead.
That's all I had to say. I don't think there's anything nefarious about lobbyists lobbying. What do you expect them to say?
All right, come on, Adela.
What do you think? Anything nefarious, but it's when you lobby saying you're lobbying for the better good. They're lobbying for real lobbyists have clients.
Well,
what
actually,
does the better good mean? Like, what the fuck does that mean? Seriously.
Well, if you listen to politics these days, anything that benefits society is socialist and bad, and everything should be capitalist and only benefit the actual individuals who suggest that it's a good idea. Anything that's a public welfare is socialist and communist, and that's the Soviet Union, and that's terrible.
Unless you're part of Yang Gang 2020.
Where are you hearing that? All I hear is the opposite of what you just said.
Oh, everybody lives in their own echo chamber. Come on, Tone.
Don't forget, Drew has a Lamborghini.
Yeah, right.
All right. Hey, any comments on what the CFTC is saying? We have right here the Commodity Exchange Act liability for smart contract coders. So this is a way to make the coders of the smart contract liable for what's in the smart contract. They had a chance to actually do something about this when the DAO blew up. Instead, they decided to say, it's okay, no big deal, carry on. And here is another CFTC. This is from, I think, from a speech, correct? This is a speech from, the chairman, Christopher Giancarlo. I did not have time to read his whole speech. Perhaps you guys heard it or saw it. What is the CFTC up to in this entire venture?
So the CFTC is really confronting an issue that I think all the regulators around the world are going to be confronting is that what do you do when you remove human beings from the process of trading and exchanging these crypto assets, right? So, we're going from a system where you have centralized exchanges like your Krakens and your Coinbase and whatnot, and now we have the capability, and we can, again, nuance omitted, where we can perform functions that were traditionally performed by centralized exchanges by software. And so some CFTC commissioners are saying, well, wait a minute. Okay, so what happens when the software can perform these functions? And what if they can perform these functions in a manner that violates the Commodity Exchange Act, for example, or the Securities Exchange Act, if the SEC was looking at this particular issue? And so what they've cooked up is this notion that there could be potential liability for the creators of the software if the software, once it's lost or launched out into the marketplace, could be used in a way that would violate the Commodity Exchange Act. And so where they're going with this is, that there would have to be some sort of and what we have here was an analysis by, one of my favorite law firms to be against, Skadden Arps, and they said, well, let's take a look at the Commodity Exchange Act and see if there's any potential way that you could fit this notion of software developers having liability within the actual language of the act. And so really what you would have to do is you would have to have this aiding and abetting theory where the software creator would be aiding and abetting a violation of CEA Act. And I think that, Skadden came up with the same conclusion when I heard it, is that this seems to be a very difficult legal proposition, and one that would require the invention of some legal principles which we don't have currently, and that's problematic. So I think that what we're going to see is that, if you're going to try to have liability for the creators of essentially decentralized exchanges, you're going to have to create some new laws that can apply to this, because currently it's very difficult to put a square peg in a round hole.
Mm-hmm. I think they specifically broke it down. You have to show, one, that the Commodities Exchange Act was violated, they had knowledge of the wrongdoing, and then they intentionally assisted the wrongdoer. So, 3 hard things to prove.
And this is one of these tough ones, because it's sort of like if you sell a hammer, yeah, you can use the hammer to kill somebody by hitting them across the head, or you can spend your life making money nailing, using the hammer to hit in nails. So when does the instrumentality be the sort of thing that is going to lead to violations of the law, or when is it the sort of thing that maybe is in the middle? And so I think Bill mentioned this, but you have this weird, for us lawyers, intersection of tort theories, aiding and abetting with a statutory violation, and those two don't normally go together. Like aiding and abetting a statutory violation typically has to be something that's created expressly as a violation in law. Otherwise, you're sort of mushing together two legal concepts that don't go together. But we see this problem over and over in a bunch of different contexts. You have the guy that sells, and I know this gets into another inflammatory area. Thankfully, Cybert isn't here to jump all over me about this. You have the guy that sells the piece of the gun where you literally snap off one little tiny piece and then it's like a gun. And he says, oh, but I didn't sell it as a gun because it had this one little piece. It's if you could reasonably expect that it's going to be used in order to commit a violation, then under Quintenz's discussion, you've got this potential violation for aiding and abetting. If it's the sort of thing that you can use it to hammer in nails and also to bash somebody across the head, maybe it's not quite as clear. I think that, as Sasha said, we've got some work to do on that front.
And just to, not throw in the business perspective of this, it's interesting because when you start reading the article, you think they're going to go one way. The ultimate conclusion goes the other. And don't forget, Skadden Arps represents Ripple in the "Is Ripple a Security or Not" lawsuit. So it's always interesting to see how those things fall in together and how nicely You can make big firms and work for their clients across I'm not surprised by the conclusion. Ultimately, I think it pulls together a lot of different aspects of the law. And by focusing on what they chose to focus on, I don't necessarily disagree that at the moment it's a hurdle. But as I like to say, a lot of my cases are, early tobacco litigation. I'm not surprised that Skavin's going to take a view that these are obstacles that can't exactly be overcome at the moment.
All right, I'm gonna, Adela, you wanna say something?
Yes, I do, actually.
Go.
So Tone, I heard that you interviewed Craig, right?
Yeah, so before I interviewed Craig Wright, I met him and we had like dinner with a bunch of other people.
I wasn't done. So, two things. I heard
Yeah.
you interviewed Craig Wright, and number two, do you have a dinner party to go to? Yeah, or a breakfast thing, or you're in Hong Kong, yeah?
Yeah, it's okay. The conference started. It's okay. This is a good discussion. We're gonna keep it going. Why? What's up?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So Craig Wright, like, what's up with that?
Well, so I spent some time with Craig Wright during dinner, and we had a lot of fun talking about how terrible Ethereum is and how it's a security and how it's not decentralized, right? So I pretty much agree with Craig Wright on his stance with altcoins. Like, we're in complete agreement here because he's right. Because that's the view that I have as well.
Like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You know what I mean? Like.
Well, I mean, we don't have to go that far. We're just saying that just because you disagree with someone on something, like, I don't like the fact that David Silver is suing my friends over in Kraken, but I agree with him on many of his other lawsuits, right? Like I can agree with David on his non-Kraken lawsuits while not being happy that he's suing Kraken, right? Like I can be okay with these views.
Yeah, I mean, I make fun of Craig Wright just as much as anybody, but the one or two times I've spoken to him, two things. He's very personable. He's got a belief system that you, and when I say you, I mean like the collective you, violently disagree with a lot of what he says. But there are moments in time where he says something that it's hard to disagree with where he's coming from and what he's saying. And I've always said this, as much as I don't believe a lot of what Craig Wright says, you can't deny the fact that he was an early adopter and believer before a lot of other people. And just because you're an early adopter or a believer doesn't necessarily make you smarter than other people or know what the legal infrastructure is more than those people. It just means you may have a lot more money than the people you're arguing with.
I am all of those.
Oh, wait,
Never, ever. I'm a 2010 Bitcoin girl, right? And before that, I did very similar things, but I'm never at any point in time going like, I'm Satoshi Nakamoto. You know what I mean?
No, but Adela, do you have $1 billion?
Does he?
Seriously,
he's been found to be faking old documents a lot. Like someone put out an article showing Craig, changing things that were on the record before. Like I wish I had the link to it, but
the lawsuit option is fascinating.
Let me just say this: if I had $1 billion, I would not answer yes on a show that's like being publicized on freaking YouTube.
But
Craig Wright would. He'd say, "I have more money than your country."
Yeah, no.
Exactly.
No. Look, we're not defending Craig's Wright's crazy, right? We're just saying that there are views that he has that that we agree with him. Like, here's one more thing about Craig Wright and Bitcoin SV, and this is the part that I kind of like. So there is Bitcoin, and then there's four altcoins that are fighting to be Bitcoin. One of them is Roger Ver's Bitcoin ABC, and the other one is Craig Wright's Bitcoin SV. Now, here's how I explain it to people. Craig Wright they're both centralized. Bitcoin ABC is centralized by Roger and formerly Jihan. Now that Jihan's been fired, I'm pretty sure it's just Roger. On the Bitcoin SV side, I'm pretty sure it's just Craig Wright. Now, I believe both of these things are totally centralized. But here's the silver lining for me. Craig Wright has openly stated his coin is going to be an anti-money laundering compliant coin. So Craig Wright is openly telling you that Bitcoin SV will be spying on all of your transactions. I think this is a great thing because I know exactly where his coin stands. His coin is a centralized coin that the only advantage that his coin offers to the current financial system is the fact that it's not going to be infinitely printed.
I mean, I like him as much as I love the flute.
Right. No. What I'm saying is, I fully understand the purpose of Bitcoin SV. I fully understand where that coin's going. I fully understand like the structure of it, and I fully understand its future. I am not interested in that future, so I have no reason to ever buy Bitcoin SV. My problem with the other coin, Bitcoin Cash, is that they are not admitting that they have this kind of control, and that fools people. I don't think Bitcoin SV fools people because they're being very clear and open that they're a centralized coin and what they're going to do with it. And I like the openness and the clarity of that coin, but I don't agree with it.
Well, they're working with the state of Texas for the virtual identity privacy coin,
Right.
and
Is that what it is?
China to make sure that money can be tracked in China's social credit system. I think this conversation is fascinating. As I said in the chat to all the other panelists, I need to go home and feed my wiener dog. So I had a great time with everybody. Thanks a lot again to everybody who's watching. And I always learn a lot when I get on with these other esteemed attorneys. And we'll see you very soon, and have a great night.
See you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Bye.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the California thing with Morgan raccoons, but maybe next time.
Quick, yeah. I don't know. How's that?
Hey guys,
Thanks.
I need to skip out. I know I was only on for a little bit, but Tone, thanks for having me. Everybody else,
Follow up from you. Any final thoughts on either a quick comment on the OneCoin Ignatova and Egmatov, the brother and the sister arrest, or Morgan Raccoon's case, or Winklevoss have to pay for Charlie Shrem's lawyers? I didn't see that one coming.
I'll touch on that one. The Winklevoss deposition conduct sanction.
Yes, please.
People who do not litigate for a living do not understand what the rules of the road are. A lot of people don't understand quite how extensively you can interrogate the other party during a deposition. Pally is smiling right now. I see it. But when you have a deposition, you can ask the other side's witness almost anything you want, unless it's obviously harassing or unless it's attorney-client privilege. You can ask just about whatever you want. And so apparently the Winklevoss twins attorney was sanctioned $15K for repeatedly telling the witness that was subject to deposition not to answer questions on the basis of relevancy. I can't speak to New York law, but in Florida law, there are two things that you're basically allowed to say. One of which is form, meaning I want to mark the question as something for the judge to deal with later, or objection due to privilege and instruct the client not to answer. I've been in
federal court. It's in federal court. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in a couple hundred depositions in my life. I've seen lawyers misbehave 1,000 ways. It's actually good to see a federal judge taking this stuff seriously. I don't know about the amount of the sanction. I don't know if $15 or $15,000 was the right amount. But from everything that I've read, it seemed like there was some deposition conduct and there was a sanction assessed for it. And I believe it's Judge Rakoff, right? Right, Pally?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Judge Rakoff, very strong judge, incredibly respected judge, does not take guff from anybody. Not a huge surprise. I don't know if the conduct necessarily required it. Good to see the federal judiciary doing what it does best, which is maintain order and decorum. Thanks, everybody.
And he's pretty familiar with Shrem.
Yes. All right, guys, take care. Bye.
See you, man. Yeah, it's
Can I just say this? I tweeted that morning after I read the story on Fast Company, sent the link, added Charlie, and congratulated Brad Klein, who I have fought with on many different cases. It was and I gave kudos where kudos was deserved. It was my single largest Twitter impressions post in my history of Twitter for my tweeting lifestyle. So apparently, if I'm nice to people on if I'm nice to my adversaries, it gets shared around a lot more. But Charlie and Brian both liked it, and it ended up for me. I rarely hit that 7-figure mark, and I want to say I got something like a million impressions for giving them congratulations on that. Whatever it was a couple of days ago. That was the most shocking aspect, more shocking than the lawyer getting sanctioned.
So, Tone,
Yes.
have a good day in Hong Kong. Guys, I have to go. I have guests. So, I want
Thank
to
you,
yell
Adela.
for so many reasons, but I'm not going to, especially David Silver. But
I love you, Adela. Sorry. Someone told me I missed feisty Adela at the beginning of the show.
Actually, Adela. Oh, I missed her. She didn't catch my irony.
yeah.
I got her. Oh, I said actually. That was for you.
Oh, yeah, no, it's actually.
Well, actually.
Right.
I'm going to go eat dinner, so I'm going to wrap up also.
Yeah. I got to run too.
Yeah,
I think we're all done.
I think everybody's done. We'll follow up on OneCoin and there was a couple of other things. Hey, David, wait, before you go, you were gonna say something about this?
Tone,
About which one?
The OneCoin thing is huge. We should talk about the OneCoin thing. Like, this should be like a special episode.
Yeah, we will. No, OneCoin. Yeah, that one is gonna be great. No, this came through. What is this? I know you wanted to comment on it, but I don't know why.
No, I think we were all. As someone who now considers, I don't take most of my day spent reading TMZ. I love the fact that all these stars got arrested today, and apparently Rob Lowe of all people is throwing shade, saying his kid had to study for the SATs, where Felicity Huffman and Lori Laughlin's kids, they actually paid someone to go take the SATs, $500,000 to do that and get into USC. My kids are going to earn their way to Michigan.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that, but that's just me,
With them paying to get their kids into college?
Right, yeah. No.
I always grew up where everyone joked around that you can go study in the library if your father's name was on the library. That's how you got into college. I always thought this was just how the world worked.
You sound like a Democrat.
Right, and Pally, before you go, quick comment on Mt. Gox.
Yeah, so litigation lasts forever, incredibly. This case was handed down today. This is one of the, there are a number of Mt. Gox related class actions that are pending, putative class actions. This hasn't been certified yet. So this is a putative class action pending in Illinois federal court. And it's actually against Mark Karpeles personally. And he moved to dismiss this complaint, said the court didn't have personal jurisdiction over him. And he made a couple of arguments, one of which was that basically that he hadn't actually been in Illinois was one. And the other was that using something called the fiduciary shield doctrine, which says that if you're only present in a jurisdiction because of work that you've done for your employer, jurisdiction shouldn't be applied to you. And the court said no. I believe the court said there were about 15,000 Mt. Gox account holders in Illinois, which may actually have been I think maybe one of the largest locations in the United States. And yeah, that's a good site. And as to the fiduciary shield argument, which is that you can't assert jurisdiction over me personally because I was only connected to Illinois because of work that I did for my employer, basically said, look, the judge agreed with the plaintiff's argument that because he owned 88% of Mt. Gox and because of certain fraud allegations that didn't apply. So basically that case against Karpeles individually is going to proceed in Illinois. The other thing the judge said was, so Karpeles said, look, I'm in Japan and I can't leave. And the judge said, too bad, so sad. That's a burden for you, but it would be more of a burden to Illinois-based plaintiffs if we didn't allow the litigation to proceed. David, what's your guess for how long it'll take before they get to the next round of pleadings, like class cert? That's going to be at least 10 months to a year.
Yeah, I mean, minimum, because there's going to be discovery battles in this one.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
I'll just use Coinbase. I mean, we're not up to class cert in Coinbase yet, and we've got at least a year and a half lead time on them.
So this litigation could poodle along for another 4 or 5 years. before anyone ever sees a check, assuming checks are actually written.
Who are the lawyers on this for the plaintiff?
Hold on a second, I'll tell you. They are, what does the opinion say?
Should be on page 1, shouldn't it?
It's not on here.
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah, I didn't pull this from Pacers, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are it's that unique boutique in Chicago, isn't it?
I think that's right, yeah.
I mean, these guys have been doing it for a pretty long time. They stayed out of the crypto space, but they were like the first ones with the lawsuit in crypto. One of my college fraternity brothers was part of that firm. They got a little scared off after this case. So good for them I'm assuming they finished it out and they're still the plaintiff's lawyers. But they were tangentially involved in the Cripsy case, but then didn't follow through. So good for them. I think this is bad for a lot of U.S. citizens who run exchanges who currently aren't in the U.S. and haven't given up their U.S. citizenship yet. That means the courts in the U.S. are really going to look at, they're not going to care that you're living in, Hong Kong or Thailand or Singapore. That if you have U.S. citizenship and you're doing business with U.S. citizens, courts are going to pull you in. Courts are going to pull you in.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is my understanding is that he actually can't leave Japan, right? I haven't followed the Japan. So the court said, we don't care. So imagine if you have somebody who's in another country doing business in the United States and they can leave that country, right? What this suggests is this case would suggest that would be an even stronger reason to ignore the fact that they were overseas. But yeah, not a good sign. I think that's one of the takeaways. If you're overseas and you're soliciting business in the U.S. from U.S. customers, the fact that you're somewhere else isn't going to protect you necessarily.
All right, guys.
Agreement. Good night, guys. There goes my voice too.
All right, I think we're gonna call it a day. I know a lot of us have to go. I need to get to my conference. And thank you all so much for coming. We do have some stories we didn't get to, including Morgan Raccoons in California. There was another case, somebody else pleaded guilty, and OneCoin. We'll get to them next time. Yes, Bella.
OneCoin.
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 Yeah. So next week I will be like, Hong Kong's been a little crazy. We're not going to talk about how much sleep I've been getting the last couple of days. Those that are in Hong Kong are probably aware because I'm out hanging out. But next week I'm in Europe. I'm in Switzerland. I'm in Mallorca. It will be a little more relaxing. We're going to definitely cover it.
I will also be in Mallorca, so we can probably do the show from there.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Come on, Sasha. Come to Mallorca.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All right. Thank you so much for sticking around. Enjoy dinner. I know it's getting late over there. And we will talk to you all on our next show. Thank you again for watching. This has been another great Bitcoin law review. Thank you so much to all my guests. We have, 6 lawyers on. Thank you so much, guys. And we will see you all on the next one. Support the content by going to Tone Vase and clicking on that affiliate page. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.